is, have you seen Native communities take that information and say, yeah, let's make some movement, or let's empower ourselves to make some changes? Are you seeing any communities taking charge of that, or do you see that maybe a follow-up report being done at AFM's next week?
You know, the biggest fear we had throughout all this would just be another government report that people put up on their shelves and become a nice dust collector. And one of our approaches to trying to at least get over that initially was we tried to package it as nicely as we could, you know, so it didn't look like a government report, so that people might actually want to pick it up and start leafing through it. And there have been a lot, and I've got a lot of positive feedback. People really like the report, but then when I ask the question, well, what are you doing about it? Well, you know. And in fact, right now, one of the things that Governor Knowles has asked me to do, because the Hickle administration, they were almost out of office when we published a report, and even if they were going to be in a while longer, I don't think they would have done anything with it anyway. We ourselves have not necessarily taken a strategic, at the state level, and I work for the governor now, at the state level, we haven't done anything strategic to try and implement the recommendations to the state of Alaska, and we've come under some fire for that recently, and so we're now internally trying to put together a plan where some of these recommendations, they'll take forever to play out, no matter how hard people work on them. Some of them can be done literally overnight if we just redirected some programming and some policies. And so I've been basically tabbed, and I have to be sincere with you that once we got that report published, I had different writers working on it, but basically the main volume, which is the first volume, I wrote most of that and did a lot of the design work, and me and one individual basically just designed the whole thing, and we were putting in 18, 19, 20-hour days there towards the end. And as soon as we got that thing sent out, last thing I wanted to do was think about it again. And in fact, when the governor last month asked me to lead up a team to start doing this, I said, I don't even know where I can find one of them damn things, Governor. I said, I haven't wanted to look at one. I mean, it just took so much out of me. It was almost like a bad marriage. But there is a feeling from the governor that we need to work with the Native community to really look at this and say, what can we do? Now, some of these, as I said, it'll take policy direction well over time for anything to happen, but there are many others that I think that we could start implementing. And really, if we look at just the way the Knowles administration does business, we're already putting the policy apparatus in place, the kinds of people in place who, if we can get a strategic plan in place, could actually do this. And so I feel real hopeful that way. At the federal level, I don't know what to say. They may or may not do something with it. I think Congressman Young is going to hold some hearings on some of the specific aspects of our findings to see, again, if there are some things that the federal government should be doing. And the Native community, they devoted most of their EFN convention last year to developing their discussions on the themes that we came out in the Native Commission's report. Again, they're the ones putting pressure on state government and federal government to, quote, do something with it. And again, they'll be, at this convention coming up next week, there'll be quite a bit of discussion. I'll be talking about the state's role in implementing.
We'll continue on with John Borbrige Jr., Tribal Imperatives to Enroll New Natives. And there will be an opportunity for folks to present questions, comments, following John's presentation. John?
As Andy mentioned to you, following my presentation, feel free to ask any questions of Andy that you wish, and he'll be prepared. One of the questions that we had discussed briefly earlier today was a question about the tribal background to the Alaska Native claims. Now, my presentation is entitled Tribal Imperatives to enroll new natives. What we're talking about here is a tribal imperative. Means that there is something in terms of the beliefs, the customs of the tribes that are so strong and so compelling that they steer us in a specific direction as far as the question of whether or not we should support the enrollment of new natives to become shareholders in Angsta Corporation. So I would like to give you some background as to the importance of the tribes and the role that the tribes played in the Settlement Act of 1971. First of all, the Alaska Natives throughout the state had always used their lands, and they had used them in a way that we now call a subsistence lifestyle. They lived off of the land. The land was not only the provider of food, but also played a very important part in the spiritual life and well-being of the Alaska Natives and the Alaska Native tribes. And so with the passage of the Alaska Statehood Act, the state began to select lands that were being used by and claimed by the Alaska Natives. So of course this caused a confrontation to develop. The Alaska organization, Native organizations began to object by filing petitions with the federal government asking that the conveyance of title, the transfer of title by the federal government to the state of Alaska cease until the land claims had been settled. Now, when native tribes or Native American tribes or Indian tribes assert their rights to the land, they do so on the basis of a theory that's called aboriginal title. And it's just a fancy way of saying that this is the right to the land on the basis of use made of the land and of the claims to the land by the original owners, in this case the Alaska Natives. Aboriginal title is a legal concept as well. Aboriginal title cannot be asserted by one individual. Aboriginal title can be asserted only by a tribe. When the Alaska Natives sought to stop the selections by the state of Alaska on the basis that the rights of the tribe should be settled first, it was the Aboriginal title rights of the tribes that were the strength that made it possible to stop the land selection rights by the state of Alaska. So as a consequence, the Alaska Natives then went to the Congress of the United States. So right away then we know that the strength of those rights was the assertions of a tribal right, the Aboriginal rights to the land. So now, although we're talking about the Settlement Act that came about a few years later and became law in 1971, it is very important to remember that the role played by the tribes in the state of Alaska. Now we were talking about the tribes, and let's take a look at land itself. The way a tribe views the land is that the tribe sees the land as something that they will have forever throughout their existence. As Andy said earlier, Andy hoped they own it in common. They own it together as a tribe. You are born into the tribe, but even after you are deceased and others are deceased, new members come in, and so the tribe continues to go on and on and on, and just the membership changes. And so to the tribes, the land is all because the tribes think this way. They think, how can we provide for those who come after? The tribes, by second nature, almost without thinking, are dedicated to the proposition that whatever they do today will be for the benefit of not only those here now, but it will also be for the benefit of those who will come after. Now, land, I'm not saying in native corporations, but land in any other kind of corporation would be viewed primarily as something that could be sold when the price is right. But with a tribe would not consider selling the land. The tribe would not reach the point of saying, let's wait until the price is right and then we can sell the land and get what we can out of it. Now let's take another approach to this question. Suppose we could say that from this metal strip here right to the end, let's call that a continuum. Let's say it represents the existence of a tribe. We don't know when the beginning is. We can say it's somewhere out here. Somewhere in there was a beginning. We don't know when. There's no date we can attach to it. The end, we'll call that the end of the metal strip today on this continuum. Now we know that our tribes fought for the land. They fought the Russians, they fought the Spaniards. Occasionally, Alaska Natives fought one another as to boundaries and trading routes. They laid their lives on the line to protect their land rights. The whole history of the existence of our native tribes indicates this very clearly. And so the question arises, if a question should come up, should we divide our land up now and parcel it out and end the whole notion of ever having land in the hands of the tribe? Would this be a good thing to do? It's tempting to think about it because it means individual benefit. I'll get my land. But what about the thing we said? To act for the benefit of those who will come after. What land will there be to pass on for them? And of course the answer is there won't be any land if we parcel it out. And so we start to see here that a corporation may very well view the question of holding on to the land differently than a tribe might view it. Just as a shareholder might feel differently about land than would a member of a tribe. And so we are in a bit of a dilemma. We're kind of caught between the rock and the hard place, so to speak. On the one hand, we think as members of the tribe, we don't want to lose our land base. We think as members of a tribe, we want to act for the benefit of those who come after. If we do that, then the question of whether or not we support the notion of new shareholders is a non-question. Under our tribal beliefs, we must accept new shareholders. It's only within a corporate perspective that this is any kind of a question to be debated or discussed at all. And so what we're saying essentially is, on the one hand, having new shareholders is a corporate question. On the other hand, we who are shareholders, or would like to be shareholders, have very strong beliefs because of our tribal background. And you've heard from most of us on the panel, we've been very forthright. We have an opinion. We have very strong beliefs. We made sure that we didn't push our ideas on you. It wasn't until you took the position of saying, I don't recall there was anyone voted against having new shareholders be supported and, new members become new shareholders. So I suggest then that our tribal beliefs, going back to the time that tribal rights as spelled out in Aboriginal title, that title was so strong that we could assert it against all third parties. Now, I know that there are others of you from other regions of the state, but this applies to all regions. If you were to get out a map of Alaska today, and you were to look at that map from my perspective and the perspective of a lot of other people in this state, you know what you would see? You would see landmarks, mountains, harbors, and headlands, and you would see all of those places with Alaska Native names: Indian, Eskimo, Aleut, Athabascan, Tsimshian. All the way across, you would see a whole number of Alaska Native names. What you see now, the so-called modern version, is one that indicates a later period of history. So I'm suggesting to you that this notion of the tribal imperative, looking to our tribal beliefs, is important if we're going to make the right decision on whether or not there should be new shareholders. For those of us who firmly believe in the principles that enable a tribe to continue on and to go on and on and on, bringing in new members, losing others through death. If we firmly believe these things and take seriously who we are as members of the tribe, then the whole question of new shareholders is literally, it's a non-question. There's no debate. And as far as measuring things in terms of, will I get a smaller piece of the pie? Let's put it in its right perspective. If I vote according to my conscience, my beliefs in the place of tribes, and what tribes stand for, then the imperative, the tribal imperative says, I must vote a certain way. Now, as I present this to you, I don't for one moment want to suggest to you that there aren't corporate questions, that there aren't questions about what will happen when we get a lot more shareholders, or I don't want to pretend there aren't questions about the kind of shares that would need to be issued if that became law, in effect, due to action of the corporation. But those are details that can easily be ironed out. And so I don't think any of us, I suggest to you, should be allowed to have the luxury of not thinking about what we believe in as members of the tribe when it comes time to consider what we should do about those who were born after 1971. I think, and I suggest to you, that we who are in a position to vote on this and to influence the outcome should be reminded by you and your friends and others as to what you believe in. And we should be expected to vote consistently and in consistence with our beliefs and what the tribal imperative would have us do. I wanted to keep this as short and to the point as possible. And having been one of those privileged to be there from the time the first ANCSA bill was introduced in '67 and AFN was organized in 66, and the final bill became law in 71. I can assure you that we did not talk about people being left out. We did not talk about that. We never considered that as a possibility. It is the Congress that said, you've got to have a cutoff line. That's what they called it, cutoff, you know. A deadline, when after which time the shareholders born after that time would not become, the members born after that time would not become shareholders. This was Western institutionalized thinking, not tribal thinking. So we've had to deal with it the best we can. But we did not, during those deliberations, ever talk about leaving any of our people out. And I don't believe there is one person who is back there who would stand up today and say this was the case. Never occurred to us. But somehow the law worked out that it did happen. And it happened because Congress wanted a deadline. They wanted things done consistent with the way they understood things. They didn't understand tribes as well, but they did understand corporations.
That's it, Andy.
Money came from?
College higher education scholarships.
Yeah. Like,
There's a number of sources, but the two main ones that I know of are the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Higher Education Services and Scholarships. Those are allocated to tribes. And it's based on the relationship between the U.S. and the tribes that Dennis referred to in his presentation when we started this morning. And then the Indian Health Service also has health career scholarships, health profession scholarships that are, I think some of them come from the Indian Education Act program too. Aren't there higher education scholarships in the Indian Education program? Nancy and Rhonda? Are they health related fields or are they all for education?
I believe they're all, but those are one of the ones that are being, they're fellowship grants, and they're the ones that are being considered to be cut out.
yeah, but like there's special scholarships for like natives and stuff, you know?
I mean,
Why?
from native corporations, they're funded by native corporations?
Like natives, like you guys were talking about that earlier?
Yeah, well,
Earlier
that's
this
just
week?
what I referred to. The main source is the Bureau of Indian Affairs Higher Education Grant Scholarship Program. That funding is allocated from the federal government to the Indian tribes to allocate out to Indian students.
I was looking into schools. Fort Lewis, Colorado. I guess they feel like quarter last May of they pay for your room and board and full tuition too. So you just need to pay for the books and plus.
Is that a private college?
Fort Lewis?
Yeah.
Fort Lewis? Dennis has a little bit more background about.
Okay. The Alaska set up a scholarship fund about 9 years ago with $2.5 million. And the idea was to use the interest after investing that for scholarships. And for a number of years, there wasn't enough money. The foundation, the Alaska Heritage Foundation, operates that program, and there was never enough money to fund all the students. We saved a little bit of the money every year because of inflation. And one of the Alaska shareholders manages the investments, and we funded about 2 out of 3 until this year. For the first time, we funded every student that qualified grade-wise with a 2-point grade point average or better. And so we provide usually $1,000 per scholarship. But something else we do provide is a list of other funding sources available. You were asking about scholarships for Native people. As Andy was saying, the federal government through the BIA does provide some funding for Native education. Another source which is very good if you're going into a health profession is the Indian Health Service. There are some health service programs that will provide you the full funding for college. That is your tuition and some additional for your other expenses as well. There are just some very good programs. For the Indian Health Service of the BIA from the federal government. And you know, as I was saying earlier, it's not a simple process, but that's money that we should not consider just gifts to us. We've given up a lot, and in return we do get some of those things back. For example, we were paid, we usually speak of $1 billion settlement. That's how much we got in the Tlingit or in the Alaska Native Land Settlement Act, $962.5 million. But when you think about what we lost included 330 million acres, including Prudhoe Bay. And $1 billion worth of oil goes through the pipeline in a matter of weeks, if not days. And that was land that we lost. And so the federal government continues to pay us a little bit through the services that we get. And there are services that continue to be cut back. One of the things that I know will happen is that ultimately they'll continue to be cut so much that they'll mean almost nothing anymore. My hope is that that doesn't happen before we become more competitive in the economy that we live in now. But we know that there are too many of our people that still have a difficult time. We don't have the education, we don't have the training that we need for some of the jobs that we've got to have. So we've got to, so far as I'm concerned, those services must continue. I don't need the health services personally. I'm covered by my insurance. But I don't represent the average for Native people either. On the average, we don't have the health insurance we need. On the average, we don't have the education that we need. So we've got to continue those services. But yes, there are BIA and Indian Health Service funding available. They're made available through appropriations. They continue to get cut, but there are some, and I'm hoping they don't get cut any more than they already are. Indian people are protesting the cuts in Washington. I think the president of the Central Council went back during one of the protests, but we are getting cut. But there still is money there. When you get ready for college, both the Central Council and the Alaska Heritage Foundation can help you finding some of the funds that are available. There are lots of scholarships that you can apply for. Most scholarships and federal funding depend on grades. And one of the things that I don't think is sufficiently understood or appreciated among our Native people is that from the time that you start high school, from your first day in high school, grades are important. Because what we look at the Alaska Heritage Foundation and what other funding programs look at is your grade point average for high school. They don't say except for freshman year. They don't say except for those years when you weren't paying attention. They say grade point average from the time you start high school. And if you do badly in your first year, that gets added into your grade point average. And if you've had some bad years, boy, you better start hustling and bring your grade point average up. If you're beyond your freshman year, but if you have younger brothers or sisters or no other Native people that are starting school, you really need to get on to them on the idea of getting in there with grade point average. Everything you do in high school, all of your academic effort is important when it comes to funding for college. And too many of us find that out too late. I can probably say that for myself. I slid by too many times in high school, and it really comes back to body later on. But what you do in high school now is just very important for funding later on.
You don't get
I'm sorry, say that again?
your SAT scores and
Your SAT scores?
you don't look at those?
Yes,
Okay, but
but
um,
and colleges look at that as well, but they also look at your grade point average.
okay, that's
And
fine.
some colleges will not accept you below a certain grade point average, including now the University of Alaska. And they would like to, they'd like to raise it beyond the point where it is. I don't recall what it is now. Several of us that have been involved in the university have opposed that, but grade point average continues to be very important. SAT scores can help you, but if you've got bad GPAs, boy, they really stick out. I know because I've been on committees where we've looked at student records to give out scholarships. And every scholarship program that I know of looks at grade point average. There are health and social services. You ever use search? Yeah, okay, well, search is one of those benefits that continue. And so health, education, and social services. Andy, maybe you could answer better than I can on the kinds of benefits that people get as they get older.
The eligibility for federal Indian services, the primary method for establishing eligibility goes back to just exactly what John and Dennis have been talking about. It's membership in a federally recognized Indian tribe. So it's not because you're individually, the federal government is recognizing you as an individual native. The benefits are provided through the tribe, and if the tribe in turn, passes those benefits on to you, it's because you're a member of a tribe, you're a member of a community. So there's housing benefits that are administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. There's sanitation facilities that are administered, primarily by tribal housing authorities, Indian housing authorities, that are funded through the Indian Health Service. There's a whole array of human services, the higher education scholarship program, the social services, credit and finance programs, the realty programs. There's just a vast array of them, primarily administered by tribes now. I think the one great advantage is, identity, the tribal identity that you gain from being a member of a community.
There is one more thing that I'd add, and that's that, as a member of a tribe, I qualify for those services. But one of the things that the Indian Health Service and other service providers are discovering is that people like myself that have worked, I worked for the university for about 20 years, and others get insurance coverage in other ways. But because of the kinds of cuts that Indian services are experiencing, they find that rather than just give me the full free service, if I've got insurance coverage, they ask for that as well, simply because they want to stretch it farther, because there's not enough funding to cover the services adequately. Every year now, particularly with the kinds of economic pressures that Congress is feeling, Indian services just continue to get cuts. It isn't as though there's some kind of formula. The school districts have a formula. If they have so many students in the schools, that is in state schools, the school district automatically gets a certain amount of money based on that. That's not true with the services provided for Indian people. If Congress is feeling a crunch, they can cut anywhere, including our services. And boy, they really do, and we're really feeling that. so the services that we get aren't assured by any means.
What do you guys mean as in tribes? You guys keep saying tribes?
What do we mean? You mean in Alaska, what a tribe is in Alaska?
Well, no, I don't know.
A tribe is a form of government. That's the simplest definition that I've come across. That's defined by the late William Paul, first Tlingit attorney. And there are 226 federally recognized tribal governments in Alaska. In southeast Alaska, there's, I think, 18. There's 2 in Juneau, in this area. The Douglas Indian Association is a federally recognized Indian tribe, and the Central Council of Tlingit Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska is also a federally recognized Indian tribe. So those are the 2 closest examples that I can think of.
Yeah, recently, recently, 2 years ago, Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs Ada Beer signed a Federal Register notice, and it listed all of these tribes that Andy just mentioned. And there's a preamble which explained what the Federal Register notice was about. And here is part of what it said. This list, the one contained in the Federal Register notice, this list is published to clarify that the villages and regional tribes listed below are not simply eligible for services or recognized as tribes for certain narrow purposes. Rather, they have the same governmental status as other federally acknowledged Indian tribes by virtue of their status as Indian tribes, with a government-to-government relationship with the United States, are entitled to the same protection, immunities, privileges as other acknowledged tribes, have the rights subject to general principles of federal Indian law to exercise the same inherent and delegated authorities available to other tribes, and are subject to the same limitations imposed by law on other tribes. Now, one of the interesting things to talk about inherent rights, inherent authority, is that our existence as tribes preceded the formation of the United States as a nation, and obviously preceded the formation of Alaska as a state in the Union. We existed as tribes by virtue of our coming together as a people, and as we existed as members of our tribes, we exercised certain powers because we were tribes. Inherent authorities or powers means that we exercise those because of our existence as tribes. It means that Congress didn't give us those powers, or no one else did, but we exercise those powers that were recognized in law because we existed as tribes. So what this list now says is that we now have the same powers as other tribes in the South 48. The primary difference being that we pretty much do not have a land base. The land is in the hands of the ANCSA Corporation. But it's interesting to note that several of the ANCSA corporations, Akachak being one, have already taken the step of transferring their ANCSA lands to the corporation in the same village in which the ANCSA Village Corporation is. And several others have done the same. I don't know how many there are, at least 3 and maybe more.
Venetine Arctic Village.
Pardon?
Venetine Arctic Village.
Yes, so that's 3 there for sure. So they've taken that step. They said, we don't need a municipality, our tribal government will serve us. So this is just to give you a little more information on tribal status and the dignity and the stature that it has here in Alaska as well as in other places.
Of the 550 federally recognized Indian tribes in the United States, 226 are in Alaska.
The question that you posed about who is a tribe or what is a tribe is really a good one for us to think about in Alaska. You know, if you go to some of the reservations in the lower 48, it's very clear what a tribe is on the Navajo reservation or the Sioux reservation or many of the other reservations. But the government and lawyers have a real difficulty in Alaska defining what a tribe is, and they still really haven't said that very well. They've come up with the idea of villages. And as Andy said, the simplest, cleanest definition has to do with it's a form of governance. If you take a look at the Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian people, our form of governance was not the Tlingit, Haida, or Tsimshian nations as such. The governing entities were clans. Those aren't tribes either. So what's a tribe? And there still continues to be confusion in Alaska. Our governing entities were clans originally. We were born into our clans, and we were born into the clans of our mothers. I'm dog Sam, that's what my mother was. But you know, one of the things that really confused that for us was that whereas traditionally our identity with a clan was through mother, with the coming of Western society, missionaries and so forth, they changed the form of identity from that clan system through mother to surname through father. I'm dog Sam, as my mother is. But the first thing that I recall as a child in regard to my identity is my name is Demmert. And I got that from my father. And so my identity that I was born into and understood was that I'm a Demmert. And my cousins who were Demmerts were the people that I identified with. Well, as it turns out, some of them were not, some of the Demmerts were not dog salmon, some of them were eagle, as opposed to raven, which is what I am. The effect of this is that over time, our identity has been confused. And there are many Native people who don't know their clan identities. And you know, the school system has really worked on reorienting us to a different way of thinking. I know that I'm dog salmon. I didn't know that early on. You know, that was not a part of my early education. After I was age 30 or so, I went and lived with an uncle of mine for about 5 or 6 weeks just because there was no place else to stay. There weren't any hotels in town, but I really learned a lot from him. And one of the things I learned was that he was very confused that I, as a child, didn't come to live with him, my mother's brother. Traditionally, I would have gone to live with him to learn the things that I needed to know as an adult. But compulsory education laws said that I had to go to school. I had to be in school. That meant the primary time of the day when I should have been with my uncle, I was with a teacher from Tennessee, among other things. And I didn't learn the things that I needed to learn. This is a long way to get around to the point that we're losing our tribal identity. But remember what the Constitution says. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with Indian tribes. Not with Indian people, not with Indian individuals, with Indian tribes. Tribalism is very important. And within the Native community, I think we're losing our sense of tribalism. It's been confused by a lot of things. And it's confused even further because the term tribe is used. Clan is our form of governance traditionally. How do you deal with it? You know, the lawyers are still trying to work that out in a lot of ways. There's still a lot of questions about that get to the courts. There's a lot of litigation. And it has to do with tribes, their rights, and so forth. So all of this is getting confused. Whether or not you know your clan identity, well, that's something I think you ought to find out. What do you know about tribes and so forth? Unless you know it, unless you learn it, it can be lost. The current used to be Commission of Indian Affairs. Its assistant secretary, the woman in charge of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, is a Menominee Indian woman from Wisconsin. I remember her saying at the FN convention, I think it was 2 years ago, use it or lose it. If you don't use your tribal identity, it will be lost. And with the kinds of changes that we're experiencing and that we're seeing, there's a real danger. And how many of your schools teach you about your tribal identity? Any of you? The time that you should be learning that, you're in schools. So we're in real danger. But I think you have to take the initiative to learn tribal identity. And as Ada Deer said, use it or lose it. And if we lose it, we're losing quite a bit.
One of the things that, if you study the Land Settlement Act, you'll find that the Tlingit and Haida people, the people of southeastern Alaska, received less land than the villages elsewhere. And if you read closely, the reason they say that we got less land was because we had a previous settlement, a very small settlement, but we had a previous settlement. That's what the law says. In actual fact, there were politics involved in all of this. And one of the federal agencies that was very influential is the Forest Service. The Forest Service had authority over the lands in southeast Alaska. And the position of the Forest Service was that they really didn't want the native villages in southeastern Alaska to have any of the forest lands that was under their jurisdiction. What we got was something of a compromise. We got a little bit of land, but we did not get as much as the other places. Now, remember the point that I made earlier, and this is to answer your question, that decision makers make decisions based on what they know. And some of the times what they know is limited. And sometimes what they have in their heads is mistaken. There are decision makers in the Forest Service who do not understand native rights. And so long as they continue making decisions based on limited information, they'll continue to make the kinds of decisions that have adverse effects on us, that are not going to do us well. If they understand the kinds of things that I think that John Borbrige will be talking with them about, maybe they'll understand differently than they do now the kinds of factors that they ought to look at when they make decisions. And so, I know that John is interested, as I am, in having policymakers, decision makers, understand more about the rights we have. If they don't understand them, they make decisions that are out of line with the facts. Rights that we received for our land losses, for one thing. We lost a lot of land. All of the land around here was ours. And we lost it based on a court settlement, a court decision. And we lost it under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. There was some negotiation involved, but ultimately the decision makers were Congress. We got to tell them what we wanted. They listened to us. They went ahead and made their decision as they saw fit. But we continue to have what I referred to and John referred to as a special relationship. The Constitution specifically mentions Native people. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with Indian tribes. Our rights are derived from that, and they're very different. There's no other ethnic, racial group that has the same kind of status as we have under the American Constitution. But as I said, we'll lose those rights if we don't keep them in mind.
The rights are largely inherent, and they're directly tied to status as Indian tribes, to tribes.
That was a good question.
John he read just a brief part of that preamble to the publication of the tribal list that was published in February 9th of this year, the latest list that included the Alaska tribes. But that's a key term, inherent rights.
Yeah, it's also interesting to note, in the first land claims bill that came out, the Tlingit and Haidas were not included. Just left out, and Congress said we already had a settlement, so we had to fight to get it included. There's one other story. Dennis mentioned the Forest Service. And believe me, we had many, many extended battles with the Forest Service. We met with the state of Alaska, and we tried to get someone from the Forest Service to sit in with us to talk about a settlement. They refused to do so. They were afraid if they sat in with us, maybe the Tlingit Haidas might get some land out of the national forest. And remember at one point the Secretary of Interior was named Earl Butz, I believe, B-U-T-Z. And finally we prevailed despite his outright, staunch, strong opposition. So reporter asked me afterwards, so what do you have to say? Well, I said, I think we kicked a little butts today. And that's what happened. I have said more distinguished things in my time, but I couldn't resist that.
He was Secretary of Agriculture
Agriculture, yeah, I said.
for President Ford, I believe. At the time that the regional corporations, native corporations, were selecting their land entitlements under the Land Claim Settlement Act. The beloved and lamented Earl Butz.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, one other thing I meant to mention, we talked about Aboriginal title. It is so strong it could stop the claims of state governments, which is what it did. And someone had mentioned over here various services that we received. I want to emphasize again that we don't receive the services because we're in need or we need them or we're in a desperate way. It's because over the years we've participated through other South 48 tribes. All of us together have participated in negotiations with the federal government. The state of Alaska has a lot of land because the natives were willing to negotiate. The United States, as I mentioned earlier, has millions of square miles of land because Native Americans negotiated with them to try to get as fair a settlement as was possible. And in return, the federal government assumes certain obligations. That's where the services come from. They're obligations, not because we're in need. I think knowing that always makes any of us feel better.
Well, if there's no more questions or comments, I'd like to thank you all for your participation today. And I hope that we continue this type of forum throughout the year. Thank you.